Hello, Danica.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. You have the most beautiful background.
Oh, thank you.
I noticed that the other day and I thought, oh my goodness, that's gorgeous.
It's these African purple beans, and they're in a community garden in Portland. I love them.
Yes.
They're huge. They're like, I don't know, 12 feet tall or something, and the leaves are big. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, it really is.
I do want to test out my PowerPoints because the last couple times I've tried to do a presentation, like I can't figure out how to, for me to be able to see my notes and the participants to just see the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I am going to.
That's what we're here for.
This is it. Too many things on my desk. So can you see just the screen or do you see my notes?
I just see the screen.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's that.
Good.
I don't know why it's been doing it for other, maybe I have some.
Well, it may be how that was set up, you know, by the person who opened the session.
Yeah.
So tell me, how do you want to handle questions?
I will generally like kind of take a break and, you know, between sections and say, are there any questions or thoughts or comments? So that's how I generally do it. And then
cool.
Send you I forgot to send you the PowerPoints.
That would be great. And then did you have anything else do you want me to send out to people? Like, do you want me to send that PDF that I have of the Trickster Tale booklet?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome. I'm glad we found you and you got here.
Yes, me too.
And Nick is in another meeting, but he'll be joining and he'll be sharing about Echo, Indian Country Echo at the end.
Okay.
So I want to be aware of time. Because I can talk about tricksters all day long.
I'm excited.
Maybe get some stretching in.
Okay.
That's better. Get some oxygen around.
There you go. Yes. And I'll watch the chat so you don't have to. So if folks want to use that instead of their voices. And I think what we'll do is we'll try to get a critical mass and start, you know, as close as we can to noon, maybe just a little after. Hi, Carmela, welcome. Anchorage, Alaska. Good. Oh, nice to hear from you, Anchorage, Alaska. I have family in Alaska, and I'm always excited when I see someone joining us from there. I'm excited to see all of you, I should say, not just the Alaska folks. So I think it's quite exciting that this venue, this Zoom process allows us to connect with people all over the country and beyond. So it's very exciting. We have someone here from Ohio. Yeah, I think it is warmer in Alaska than it is right here. It was last night when I looked at the maps. I don't even know what our temperature is right now. I heard we were going to maybe get up to 1.
A bolstery 1 degree.
Yes, but the sun is shining, so it feels like it's much warmer. Oh, we've got a snowstorm up in Alaska. I'm so glad to see all of you here. If you have a moment, please put your name, your email, and your organization into the chat. That helps us know who's here. It helps folks do some networking maybe as we talk with one another and share ideas. It also helps me with attendance. So just take a moment before we start and go ahead and put in your name, email, and organization. I love seeing where you're from too. So we've got folks from several states here. Yay, Duluth is even colder than St. Paul. So hang in there, Duluth colleagues. Well, I think on the news this morning, it said it was 51 below wind chill in Duluth and Grand Marais. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's where I'm going someday to live. All right, we're right at noon. We're going to wait just a few more minutes. We had lots of people sign up, and I want to give them a chance to get into the room before we start. So yes, please continue to put in your information into the chat so folks can know who's here and maybe circle back and be in contact with you again. We want this to be a community, not just kind of information going out, but hopefully a sharing of information and support. Nebraska, yay. I love this. This is so exciting for me. Um, Hi, Lorraine. It's always good to see colleagues from Wayside. Ooh, sea smoke. Cool. There's sea smoke in Duluth. That's got to make it feel like a special day, like you're surrounded by spirit, I would think. I've never been there when it's like that, but. All right, well, I think it's time to get started. You all are here and more will join us, but I want to say welcome to the Indigenous Women Wellness Echo. We are here in partnership and community that's made possible by the Department of Human Services through SAMHSA grants. And all of this is done in partnership with American Indian Family Center, who really helps with content and making sure that the technical assistance I provide is appropriate to our community, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I've talked with our presenter, Danica Brown, and she has suggested that she'll break for questions, so you won't need to interrupt, but if you want to put something into the chat, I'll help keep track of it, so you don't lose track of it. And she'll also take breaks where we can unmute and ask our questions or share our comments. I want to also introduce someone to you. Nicole Fernandez is here, she's waving. And Nicole is my colleague at Wayside. This will be my last echo. My position is no longer going to be at Wayside starting on Monday. And so Nicole is going to step in and keep things going. And I am sure you're all in good hands, and I'm excited to have her here today. The next echo we have is for this Indigenous Women Wellness Echo is scheduled for February 22nd. And we'll talk a little more about that again at the end. But for now, I want to turn things over to Danica. Danica, thank you so much for being here. She's coming to us from Oregon, and I heard a similar presentation at the Harm Reduction Summit earlier in 2021, and was so impressed, and I'm so excited that she's been gracious enough to share her time and expertise with us today. So, Danica, you're on.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my slides. You can see my slides or my notes. We're still good. All right. I'm technology challenged. So Halito Achishiok Shlubo Halili Fijik. I'm Danica. I'm a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm the Behavioral Health Programs Director at the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. And I'm really glad to be here, and I love talking about Trickster stories as related to the work that we're doing at the board. So the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board is the health board that works with the 43 federally recognized tribes in the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of the work that we do, particularly around substance use disorders and the opioid response, is actually national work. So we go all over the country. Before COVID, we would go all over the country. Now we Zoom all over the country to talk about the work that we do with tribal communities. And we developed this kind of concept of the trickster story specifically related to the opioid response. And I wanted to just kind of share what that is. And it's our way of kind of incorporating traditional Indigenous knowledge into the work so it makes it more accessible for tribal people. And, this presentation is an attempt to help us to understand why tribal people respond and react to service providers in the way that they do. I will be talking about historical trauma and other kinds of historical events that have impacted both Black and Indigenous people. And so if you feel like you're having a trauma response to it, I want you to, think about what it is that you're responding to, take some time to assess this. And particularly if you're not Black or Indigenous, to kind of look at your biases and where this might be affecting you in the ways that it is. Unfortunately, in this presentation, I don't have time to process kind of all the feelings that tend to come up for people. I just ask that you be respectful of the process. But if you need time after this workshop, please let me know and I'll be available to talk. For tribal people on, what we know as North America, current and past political and social events help shape the context of our lives in ways that many other Americans do not experience. The study of trauma, historical and present, has been connected to historical genocide, assimilation, depression, suicidal thoughts, anger, anxiety, low self-esteem, and difficulty in both recognizing and expressing emotions that impact substance misuse. A culturally responsive mental health system must recognize the broader social and political factors that underlie mental health issues for Black and Indigenous people. Even the American Psychological Association guidelines recognize the importance of socio-political factors in a client's treatment, such as generational history, the history of migration, the citizen status, English fluency, the extent of support from the family and community, and the levels of stress resulting from acculturation and systemic racism. A successful mental health system must find ways to integrate mainstream services with culturally and traditional services to address mental health needs of BIPOC communities within the broader context of their lives. Substance use disorders can impact anyone, and because it's a chronic health condition and not a moral failing. As a community, we can look towards the trickster, or the tricky one, to learn how substance use disorders can impact tribal communities in similarly sneaky and cunning ways. In oral tradition, the trickster is a sacred being that assumes many forms. He can be Old Man Coyote with some tribes, Raven in the Northwest tribes, and more generally, the tricky one. Just to mention a few of the manifestations, and many tribes across North America have trickster's tales. The common theme about trickster's tales is that tricksters scandalize, they disgust, they amuse, they disrupt, they chastise, and humiliate, or sometimes are humiliated by the animal-like proto-people of prehistory. Yet he is also a creative force for transforming the world, sometimes in bizarre and outrageous ways, with his instinctive energies and cunning. In eternally scavenging for food, he represents the most basic instincts. But in other narratives, he is also the father of tribal people and a strong conductor of spiritual forces in the form of sacred dreams. In respect to substance use disorders, the substances we use are first medicines meant to cure and heal. And at some point, this transforms into misuse and dependency of that medicine. We can imagine that there's a trickster spirit that is the culprit in this, a spirit that is attempting to teach us important lessons, lessons of humility, compassion, of living in balance with the natural world, respect for the spirit of the medicines that we use. And I want to just be explicit in the use of the word medicine is not within the Western context of like a prescription that's prescribed, but rather the energy that traditional medicines carry. So there are multiple aspects to consider when looking at opioid misuse or other substance use disorders. First, the essence of opioids and other medicines is a powerful spirit or a prescription to be used, usually to end pain, to address the issues of pain. Secondly, the current prescription of substance use stigmatizes, or excuse me, the perception of substance use stigmatizes and produces shame or guilt. And when we can understand substance use in a different way, for example, as a trickster, where this energy kind of, gets twisted up and turns out, but that trickster has lessons for us, specifically lessons around humanity and compassion for those who are suffering the most. So in order to help and learn the lessons that the trickster has to offer, we need to address our relationships with medicine rather than the SUD process by shifting our understanding and relationship with not only the medicine, but our medicine providers. And, specifically when we're talking about, substance use disorders and particularly opioid use, opioids create pain or, address pain, whether it be physical, mental, or emotional. And so what we're now understanding is that trauma and our relationship to trauma is what causes and is tied to substance use disorders. And there's a lot of research that I won't go into today that connects, trauma, historical, intergenerational, and situational trauma to substance use disorders. Trauma is an extraordinary psychological experience caused by threats to life and body or personal encounters with violence or death. It's important to acknowledge that the term trauma comes from a Western medical context. So for us at the board, what we're trying to do is move away from kind of the pathological definition of trauma to understanding what we're calling an Indigenous trauma care. So shifting the narrative from as this pathological experience where people are now broken and sick and need, to be cured, that trauma is a way for us to survive. And that once, that trauma is created as a survival mechanism, and that we need to work with folks to help them address and deal with that and have develop better and more healthy coping mechanism. So for us, a lot of times we try to, indigenize this concept. So alternative terms for trauma would be, from an Indigenous worldview, is to consider like parallel realities or multiple realities, which recognize the value and legitimacy of these experiences, which often revel in important contexts that is vital to one's healing process. So we don't want to pathologize these experiences anymore. So developing an Indigenous or decolonial understanding of trauma helps to address the stigma that is tied to a Western understanding and helps us to create space for growth and healing. And so when we think about trauma, trauma is, again, around safety and security, threats to life, whether they're perceived threats or real threats. And, we have our general kind of trauma responses, which are flight, fight, freeze, or fawn. Fight can be seen as anger, anxiety, and adrenaline rushes, being short with people and ourselves. Flight can be seen as an overexcitement and sometimes also comes out as anger. A lot of times when we're in flight response, we're focusing on anything but the event. Freeze can be seen as depression, sadness, and ambivalence, and not being able to focus on anything. When we're in that freeze response, our executive functioning is compromised, so our hygiene might be affected. We might not be eating regularly, or we'll be overeating. And so our executive functioning is impacted in that trauma response. And fawning, in a nutshell, is the use of people pleasing to diffuse conflict, feel more secure in relationships, and earn the approvals of others. When we're thinking about fawning, we see this response a lot in people who are in interpersonal violent relationships. And so when we're also talking about trauma for Black and Indigenous people, we need to think about trauma from a historical trauma aspect. And so historical trauma results from the long-term effects of oppressive, traumatizing policies, attitudes, and beliefs of the colonizer towards American Indian people. The lack of resources and opportunities for American Indian people, and current treatment of American Indian people in this country. Maria Braveheart Yellowhorse defines historical trauma as a cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma. And Eduardo Duran refers to this as soul wounding. These soul wounding symptoms of historical loss are interconnected, each one affecting the other to varying degrees. And historical trauma can often produce complex and profound individual and collective biopsychosocial, cultural, and spiritual responses. And we do know now that these responses are connected to health disparities. There's a direct result or direct connection between colonization and the effects of historical trauma, which can include depression, substance dependency, suicidal ideation, and other health risk factors. The negative impact of broad social factors that have been influenced by colonization, such as racism, acculturation, poverty, are translated into everyday physical and emotional distress experienced by American Indian people. This trauma is epigenetically transferred from one generation to the next and is expressed in many ways that are connected to the disproportionate rates of poverty, chronic physical and mental health issues, mortality rates, and substance abuse and dependency rates. So what we're now understanding is that there is some evidence of the epigenetic transfer of trauma. Trauma can be passed down to offspring due to epigenetic changes in the DNA. And specifically, it doesn't change the DNA, it impacts the proteins that surround the DNA strands. And in recent years, researchers have learned that trauma can be inherited. But this is a picture of the man who I consider my grandfather, little Joe Gomez. And when I was growing up, he used to say that the memories of our ancestors are passed down on our blood. And what I think he was talking about was this epigenetic transfer of trauma. But what he's also talking about is that there's an epigenetic transfer of our ancestral wisdom, our resilience, and our ability to thrive under very adverse conditions. So, severe stress doesn't just affect one generation, it is passed down both socially, affecting, the way that we parent, for example, and physiologically by actually changing how children's genes are read, which can alter both the brain and body. And so particularly powerful is the process by which colonization has become internalized American Indian people and serves to shape health outcomes. Genocide against Indigenous people of the Americas is one of the most massive and longest lasting campaigns in human history. Historical traumatic events have contributed to these disparities related to social and behavioral factors, such as resulting into increased younger female households, significantly higher poverty rates, larger families, lower median income, lower education, etc., and including substance misuse. And I won't talk about this too much today, but the burden of trauma is put on the is impacted women more acutely than it does non-women. And so it's really important for us to understand and support women in our healing processes. As traditional people too, women who are the givers and keepers of life were also the holders of wellness and healing practices. And so for us at the board, we're really thinking about that matriarchal role and what that means for our communities and for healing in our communities. Trauma is stored in the limbic system of the brain, which is not connected to language, and memory is stored in the cerebral cortex with language. So one of the aspects of healing trauma is to bring the limbic system back into health with communicating with the cerebral cortex. And the way that we do that is through ritual, prayer, ceremony, meditation, yoga, walking, dancing, whatever this is. And when you're doing things like meditation and prayer and ceremony, it brings your parasympathetic nervous system into a more regulated state, brings oxygen to your brain, so that the different parts of your brain, particularly the limbic system, is in communication with the rest of the brain. And we do that through ritual and ceremony. And one of my beliefs too is that when we want to access that ancestral wisdom, that epigenetic transfer of knowledge, we do that also through prayer and ritual and ceremony. There's no science behind that. That's just the world according to Donica. But I will stand by that statement. So I want to open it up for any kind of questions right now. I see that there might be some chats, but are there any questions or thoughts, particularly around the aspects of trauma and intergenerational and historical trauma?
You can go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm not seeing anything in the chat just yet. A lot of people are still signing in and letting us know they're here.
I'll give it just a moment. I'm good with silence. All right. So, again, when we're talking about, this concept of addiction, and I like to move away from this term addiction and use terms like substance misuse. But there's this really amazing book, and if you haven't read it, I would read it if you're working with any human being, but especially people who've been marginalized by society, is to read this book by Gabor Mate, In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts. And in this book, he really talks about the kind of the physiological connection between trauma and substance misuse, and particularly dependency. And the core of the book really comes down to this quote. And the question is never why the addiction, but why the pain. And so when we're talking about pain, we know that it's tied to our relationship to trauma, but even more particular, it's tied to our connections with other human beings. And generally speaking, that's where the pain comes from. And substance misuse disconnects us. Substance dependency disconnects us from our communities and from our support networks. And the antidote to that is connection. So that's one of the things that we need to kind of talk about and think about when we're looking at, the programs that we're creating. Substance dependency always originates in pain. And this is the very same brain centers that interpret and feel physical pain become activated during the experience of emotional rejection. On brain scans, they light up in response to social ostracism, just as they would when they're triggered by a physical stimuli. The hurt is the center of all substance use dependency. So a lot of times in treatment, we talk about, why are you using drugs? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? But really, we need to shift that conversation. People who are chronically misusing substances are people who are suffering. And the way that we need to treat them is of that way. And they have, going back to the Trickster story, people who are misusing substances have a lot to teach us about our humanity and the way that we treat people who are suffering. But I want to shift also the narrative, and in fact, there is hope. We know that trauma reactions occur when there is a substantial perceived or actual threat. However, we also know that people often experience the same event and react very differently. Where one may be traumatized, others are able to demonstrate greater resilience. In other words, it's not the traumatic event itself that causes human distress, but rather the reaction to the traumatic event. And we are strong and resilient in getting back to our connections with our ancestors, our culture, our community, and developing resilient connections. So many people find healthy ways to cope, respond to, and heal from trauma. Often people automatically reevaluate their values and redefine what is important to their lives after a traumatic event happens. And some of the resilient responses can include our increased bonding with family and community, redefining or developing an increased sense of purpose and meaning in our lives, increased commitment to a personal mission, and revised priorities, and increasing charitable giving or volunteerism. And again, it's what a resilience response to trauma is: connection and connecting to your community. So using information about biology and trauma, what we understand and what we can do is, to support our clients to provide a message of hope, that they are not alone, they are not at fault, and recovery is possible and should be anticipated. Trauma is something that happens to them. It's not who they are. So one of the things that I always say to people who experience trauma is that you're having a normal response to an extraordinary event. Again, you are having a normal response to an extraordinary event. It's important to frame re-experiencing these events, hyperarousal, sleep disturbances, and other physical symptoms as physiological reactions to extreme stress. Communicate that treatment and other wellness activities can improve both psychological and physiological symptoms. For example, therapy, meditation, prayer, ceremony, yoga. These different activities help our bodies to re-regulate. Discuss traumatic stress symptoms and their psychological components. Explain to clients that there are links between traumatic stress symptoms and substance use disorders if appropriate. And normalize trauma symptoms. For example, explain to clients that their symptoms are not a sign of weakness or a character flaw or being damaged, or they're not going crazy. Again, they're having a normal response to an extraordinary event. And so what we know works is that, we know that those who are fluent in many theories and models of treatment, those who are client-centered and counselor-driven, who focus on strength and protective factors, the practitioners who are able to develop trusting therapeutic relationships and who work within their area of expertise. And most importantly, that we understand that culture is prevention and culture is intervention. And that when we connect people to their culture and to their community, that is healing within itself. And I want to also offer a different way of understanding wellness. From an Indigenous perspective, health and wellness is centered in a holistic model, whereas Western perspectives are based on illness and disease. This includes philosophies that equally consider the spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical aspects of the person. Renee Linklater, in her book, Decolonizing Trauma Work, adds that the mind, body, spirit has influenced much of psychiatric thinking. And, we want to define health and wellness, indicating wellness has multiple facets of life, including the environment, space, the health of the earth, our relationship with our ancestors, our relationship with our communities, and our relationships with all living beings. Treating health among American Indian people, include the dimensions of caring, traditions, respect, connection, holism, trust, and spirituality. And so it's a complex, use of the idea of holistic work. Many American Indian traditions look at the medicine wheel to define wellness, seeking balance in the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual intersections of life. But this also includes our relationship with what we call Father Sky, which represents our ancestors, our ancestral knowledge, and our Mother Earth, and our relationship with Mother Earth, and the resources that our Mother Earth provides us. So, Indigenous philosophies are holistic in nature, which consider all of these. This is in contrast to Western philosophies, which compartmentalize these aspects and rarely address or consider the spiritual aspect of the human condition. Indigenous models are based in wellness, while Western models are concerned about disease and curing disease. For example, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders defines mental health as a state marked by absence of illness, whereas Indigenous philosophies understand that mental health is a broad spectrum of challenges that Indigenous people face in their life. American Indian elders and developers, we have worked on a program called the 49 Days of Ceremony, and we're developing a curriculum that's based on this holistic idea and model of working with people. So wellness is related to our understanding of balance to oneself, family, and community. Again, it's not just about balance for your individual self, it's a balance within connection with your tribe, with your family, with your community, and with the greater society as a whole. And Renee Linklater also in her book defines and identifies several themes in understanding American Indian wellness, including balance and harmony, being in creation, care and compassion, and challenges that American Indian communities contend with in result of the pursuit of wellness. Specifically, she states that the core of the human experience is spiritual, and the core of human wellness is spirit and spiritual. She also discusses the concept of being in creation and in relationship to wellness. Indigenous people often maintain a strong relationship with creation and our ancestors, past, present, and future. A connection with the Creator has as well as understanding of one's place and purpose within the universe. This can be interpreted as being enough, having enough, and having enough. Being able to know who you are is echoed by our tribal elders. American Indian people learn this from our creation stories, which are tribal interpretations of our ancestors' ancestral wisdom, natural law, and cultural expectations. Creation stories explain to American Indian people that our responsibilities and expectations for us are in relationship to our communities. In some senses, it might be understood that relations with the spiritual realm, including relationship with the Creator, encourage a person to see themselves as part of a larger network, the network of creation. And this can be a powerful experience of healing for many people. And our tricksters are always embedded in our creation stories. So we want to go back again to those trickster stories. So the primary, medicine or healing that can happen is around substance misuse is to assess and develop a relationship with the medicine. And so, for example, and this includes prescriptions. For example, a couple of years ago, I had to have a lot of oral surgeries, and I was really grateful for opioids. I was so happy that they were giving me opioids. But I had a relationship with that medicine, and I understand how that medicine affects my body, how it affects my spirit. And essentially what I tried to do was to go into treaty with that spirit in that medicine, that we had an understanding that that medicine was gonna help me get through this oral surgery and help me with the pain. But it also changed my relationship with my medicine people. We have to change that relationship. So I had a conversation that I had to initiate with my provider about my relationship with opioids. We had a conversation. I had an allergic reaction to a certain type of opioid, and so I needed to have a conversation with my medicine person. And this includes traditional medicine people as well as Western medicine people. Eduardo Duran, he talks about that all kind of conditions have a spirit, and that we need to develop a relationship with that spirit, whether it be substances or mental health or diabetes or, whatever it is. And so, what we talk about is that we want to go into treaty with that spirit of that medicine so that we can have a relationship with it. So kind of moving back towards this traditional understanding of our relationship with medicine. And this also includes our first medicines, our relationship with water, our relationship to, in this picture, we went, my friend and I went huckleberry picking, and, in the background is that, beautiful Mount Hood mountain, having a relationship with that and, giving thanks for these first medicines as well. We know that like with diabetes and other health conditions that food is those medicines, and, developing a relationship with that medicine. So in conclusion, I just want to say that we can heal our communities through culture, through connection, and developing interventions and policies that are grounded in traditional Indigenous knowledge, tribal-based practices, as well as evidence-based practice. And that's not just in the case of substance use, but in other conditions as well. And so I will stop sharing, and then we can open it up for some discussion and questions. And then if Nick is here, I don't see Nick, but we can open it up for conversation, and maybe he'll join us in a little bit.
So feel free to unmute. Maybe you have a comment, something resonated with you, or maybe you experience a similar tradition. We've got people from all over the country here representing lots of different relatives, and invite you to share your experience. Go ahead, unmute, or I'm watching the chat.
Hi.
Hello.
I just found it interesting um, about having a relationship with medicine um, because as a former addict myself, I had a relationship uh, with drugs and alcohol. So that was my relationship until I came into recovery. So now my relationship is with recovery. And you can feel and see the difference when you was talking about how one of your slides says that the body remembers different traumas and things. Wow, I was just thinking back how awesome that is because our bodies feel everything. Sometimes we just ignore it, and we medicate. But if we really pay attention to our bodies, they do remember. I remember in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous when they talked about that, how our bodies remember triggers. It remembers dates and people that we're around. I just found that so, I just find that so wonderful to know that because sometimes you think you're the only one who feels those things.
Right?
and, and I'm saying, my body does remember, my mind does remember. I do get triggers and I feel that, in my heart or my spirit. So I just found that very fascinating and interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I didn't get into that too much, and I might add it to this presentation, but there's a significant amount of research that shows there's an embodiment of trauma that happens. And there's an embodiment of historical trauma. And so for one of the projects that I work on, or what I did on my dissertation research, is I work with Dr. Karina Walters and Dr. Michelle Johnson Jennings, who are both Choctaw researchers. And we developed a program called the Yapoli Project, which is a project we worked on with our tribe. And Yapoli means to walk in silence or walk with reverence. And what it is it's a historical trauma healing program that we developed. There's a 3-month module kind of curriculum that we developed around kind of understanding historical and intergenerational trauma and its relationship to us, reclaiming our cultural knowledge. So part of that project, we were a matriarchal society, and so it's a women's project. And then we rewalk the Trail of Tears, and we rewalk the whole trail. We walk from Mississippi to Oklahoma, essentially walking across Arkansas. And for my dissertation, what I did was I interviewed women who completed the program, who completed the curriculum, who walked the Trail of Tears. And then the other aspect of it is that they develop a community health project in their community. And particularly interesting from the interviews was women's experience of the walking and healing that happened with the walking, the physical aspect of rewalking that trail, of healing and transforming that historical intergenerational trauma. I think, with trauma work, our inclination is to avoid like talking about the trauma, but when it's embodied, you can't not talk about it. But what we would say on the trail was, we don't want you to get stuck in the drama of the trauma. Our ancestors walked with a vision of health for us, with a vision that they carried. They walked, and we need to revisit that vision. So that was the purpose. And so my study was entitled Our Vision of Health for Future Generations. But there is this aspect of the physical moving through the embodied trauma that happened to us, and doing it in a thoughtful, supported, intentional way helped us to process and deal with both the intergenerational as well as the historical trauma that we experienced. And every woman that I interviewed expressed an embodied transformation. And sometimes they didn't have words for it, right? When we talk about trauma, like, when I was talking about that, how the brain works and the trauma happens in the limbic system, and that's not connected to language, it just happens. And so a lot of times the women would say something like, a lot of them would, put when describing this experience of the embodied healing and transformation, they would put their hand on their heart and they would say, I don't have any words to explain what I had experienced. I just had this experience and I felt it here. I knew I was with my ancestors, and they would put their hand on their heart. But all of them talked about an embodied experience of healing that happened from actually walking the trail of tears. So that experience that you're talking about, Carmela, is absolutely true.
Thank you. We have a question from Carrie. Carrie, do you want to unmute or do you want me to read it?
Sure, I can unmute. I'm wondering, thank you, by the way, for the wonderful talk. I am a white woman pharmacist who works with individuals who are in treatment for a variety of substance use, but a lot of opioid use disorder, and a significant population of Indigenous people. And I'm wondering if you or anybody in the group has any, I attend trainings and I try to go to every CE and try to do better and be better, but looking for like actual skills-based training for having these conversations in a more person-centered, culturally aware, useful way. Do you have advice on that?
I do. Take a course in motivational interviewing. That's what I would suggest. And, so part of what motivational interviewing is about, there's like, I think 9 principles, but the first principle of motivational interviewing is empathy, and having empathy. So part of like why I discuss substance use disorder in the way that I discuss it, like as a trickster, is that we can shift our understanding of what that means for people. Again, like, people who are chronically dependent on substances, they're suffering. And if we can remember that, but, they're really hard to work with, right? They're really frustrating to work with. People who are addicted to substances are prickly and slippery, and they can be mean, and they're ambivalent, and it's really frustrating. But, if we can remember that all of that is a form of resistance that covers up pain, then we can have empathy for them. But I would suggest, taking a course in motivational interviewing. And I think everyone should take a course in motivational interviewing, not just like therapists or counselors or social workers. Doctors should, right? When we're talking about behavior change, like medical providers, that's what we're talking about. We're trying to get people to change their behavior. And so motivational interviewing is one of those things. And we do have an Indian country echo on substance use disorder. And there's a lot of pharmacists who participate in that echo. And I would suggest even attending that echo, because we do get a lot of pharmacists who are in that. And the reality is that pharmacists are also are medicine people, right? Like you usually know more about actually the side effects of the prescriptions that were being given than the doctors do. In my experience, I'm just gonna say.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I could definitely use a refresher course, I think, on MI. So appreciate that. If anybody has any recommendations and want to throw it in the chat for particular training, I would take it too. Thank you.
Hey, Carrie, it's Pam Hughes. So we did have a motivational interviewing training set up, especially for our Indian people, but we had to kind of postpone it due to COVID. I'll keep you in mind when we reschedule it. And then another thing, and I may have mentioned this in other meetings, but because I really like books, but there's a book out by Anton Truer, and it's called Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians, But Were Afraid to Ask. It's a great book. It's a great, I mean, I giggle when I read it, and I read it over and over, but it's spot on. But yeah, I will keep you all in mind when we finish setting up our motivational interviewing.
Pam, thank you. Will you type in the chat the name of that book and the author again? I think there's a number of people here who might want to enjoy reading that.
I can do that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, additions? Ooh, Irene, do you want to, I can read it, but do you want to go ahead and jump in?
Sure, yeah. My name is Irene. I use she, their pronouns. I work in the realm of, let's see, mental health counseling or therapy. And I'm wondering about some of the holding that we've talked about in regards to stress and trauma that can be situational, historical, or ancestral, or all of the above. And I'm just wondering what your experiences have been with somatic healing modalities. And relatedly, I'm curious about the way that you approach relational pain and trauma, as so often folks, you know, who experience historical trauma, there's been a disruption of family, traditional family patterns and traditions and parenting. And I see that a lot with the folks I work with. And so and I know that it's often termed, you know, attachment disorder. And so I really appreciate the way that you're encouraging us to move away from the medical terms and the focus on illness. I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Yeah, the attachment disorder is an interesting diagnosis, right? And really, you know, again, when we look at like, you know, diagnoses like attachment disorder, the onus again is put on like the individual, right? Instead of understanding like the reason a lot of American Indian people, tribal people have this diagnosis of attachment disorder was because, yeah, they probably had a relative who are just, you know, or a descendant of someone who survived the boarding schools, right? So instead of looking at like the systemic and political and, you know, conditions of that, it's the onus again is put on like the individual, and particularly like the survivor of you know, someone who has you know, a detached parenting style. But you know, we learn detached parenting styles from, you know, the impact of acts, you know, political acts of genocide. You know, the boarding school experience was a systemic act of genocide that impacted our communities. So instead of like looking at that and talking about that and addressing that, we, you know, give people these kind of individual diagnoses that they are, you know, not attached. You know, I think like right now, especially with, you know, the current issues around like the findings of the boarding schools and American and Canadian boarding schools being investigated, you know, with, you know, and these like graves being found at boarding schools. And, you know, there's this kind of resurgence of this conversation of the impact of boarding schools. And, you know, it's a challenging thing because the boarding school experience affected our relations so much and so deeply that they don't want to talk about it. But it's one of those things that we have to talk about, not individually, but collectively, and talk about the collective healing around this experience. And, you know, the collective healing around, you know, being the descendants and survivors of this like, you know, horrible thing that happened in this country. And I think sometimes we're waiting for, you know, the government to acknowledge the harm that was caused, but we can't wait for them to acknowledge it because they're never going to do it. And so, you know, I think that that's part of that conversation, is that, you know, moving away from that, like, individual, you have this diagnosis of attachment disorder, and saying, like, let's talk about this historical event that happened to our people, and how can we learn to be parents again? How can we learn to be, you know, in good relationship with our community again?
Just something that came to mind as we were talking about skills, you know, and how to better work with Indigenous populations. I just heard that the Red Lake Nation here in Minnesota was given an award, I think it was called the Circle of Excellence, from the Department of Human Services. And it was in their decolonization focused way of working with families and children, women and children especially. And I bet you there's something to be learned from looking at the changes they've made to their human service systems within service delivery on the Red Lake Nation. So just an idea. It's relatively new and in the news. Anybody else have questions? Comments? Oh, Amanda. Amanda, do you want to unmute and go ahead and talk about DBT?
I don't have any questions, but if it's okay that I make a statement. I'm a member of the Red Lake tribe, on my mother's side, and my father's side is Norwegian. And we grew up with quite a bit of trauma. And so first of all, what I wanted to say about trauma is that people come with understanding and compassion, because that is one thing that will validate those that have been traumatized. And also with my experience of, I guess racism, is I look like my Norwegian family, but I very much grew up with my Native American family. And once my grandparents passed away, that culture was kind of lost within our family. And it also, I don't know that it was really spoke about. So one of the things that I've done is been on a journey myself to know who I am and where I come from. And that has really been just a huge blessing. And it really makes me feel grounded, and it makes me feel, it just helps some of those wounds I've had and some of those things by going back and learning my own history and knowing more about my family history and where I come from. And one of the things that I would like to encourage people is that you seek it out and you learn it, whether you're Caucasian or, you know, whatever, that we're seeking and learning about other cultures so that we can be more understanding. And that's basically all I had to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. I think that's very important, especially because, well, it just is. Thank you. Go ahead, Dana.
I think knowing who you are and knowing who your ancestors are is really important. It's challenging because acculturation in the United States was challenging. And also, for the descendants of enslaved people, they don't have that opportunity, right, to be able to find out who their ancestry is and who their, what culture they came from, right? And so, but I think, doing what we can, gathering stories from, those that we can, again, like colonization really impacted all of us, and people, like my grandmother, she held that knowledge and did not share it with us, because it was her way of surviving. Like she wanted to, assimilate into white culture for survival. She was born in the 20s, and that was how she survived. And, for me, it was like important for me to go back and learn those histories and learn those stories as much as I can. And I too, my mother was Scottish. And so I went on a journey to Scotland to learn about my mother's side of her family. And I was so surprised to learn, these different histories and these stories. And it was really healing for me. It helped me to heal my relationship with my mother, who was also pretty severely mentally ill. So, but we also have Nick here. Hi, Nick. Who's going to talk about, some of our programs at the board. But I just want to share that I'm available by email. I'll put it in the chat if you want to, continue having conversation or anything like that. I'm definitely available.
Dana, can I quickly ask that if you can you put something in the chat about the two curricula that you mentioned, the one you're working on and the one that you completed, because I think people might want to follow up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry I'm late. I had a conflicting meeting, and yeah, sorry Donica, I didn't get to hear your wonderful presentation again. But I was asked to join just to provide a general overview of our Indian Country ECHO program. I am a member of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians from Northern Michigan. I'm an ECHO case manager with the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, pharmacist by training, and also I'm with the United States Public Health Service. So I do have a short presentation, Rebecca, if you're able to give me share screen.
Yeah, let me do that. All right, you are a co-host.
All right. And is that looking okay?
It is.
All right, perfect. So today I'm just going to provide a brief overview of our program. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the ECHO program or not, so I apologize if this is not new information, but just providing a little context into the ITU system of IHS, tribal or urban facilities. They really have a chronic history of being understaffed with high turnover, very few specialists. There's low funding compared to other national programs like the VA, Medicaid, Medicare. And then on top of that, there's high health disparities. So really some significant challenges to providing quality healthcare at the level, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with at least some of these bullet points. So in 2003, the ECHO model was developed by a physician at the University of New Mexico. Basically, they were looking to increase rural clinicians' ability to treat hepatitis C, as they were finding that people were dying of something that was curable and treatable. It was just a matter of access. So really the ECHO model was designed to increase access to treatment. In 2017, the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board started to take a look at our own tribes, Indian country, and what we could do to improve treatment to hepatitis C as well. And that's kind of where Indian Country ECHO was born. I'm going to skip the video introduction here. So ECHO is Extensions for Community Healthcare Outcomes. It's a free service for ITU providers, and it's designed to enhance care delivery for patients with complex conditions. So basically, we are pushing to increase access to care via telehealth, so that our members across Indian country, various reservations, may receive quality healthcare in-house from providers that they know and trust. So we have primary care physicians that come on, they learn the treatment processes to a whole gamut of specialty topics that started with hepatitis C, but has since expanded. They discuss patient cases, they receive mentorship, and then they're able to take that information back to their clinic site and start treating in-house, so that we reduce referrals, reduce overall costs, and most importantly, improve timely access to care. So each ECHO program has virtual ECHO clinics, which are regularly scheduled sessions that allow for a friendly, interactive online learning environment. We also offer in-person and online trainings, and then also on the back end of things, provide technical assistance and capacity building, mentorship and help there as well. So the virtual ECHO clinics, again, clinicians, healthcare leaders, they meet online. Our platform is Zoom. They receive up-to-date treatment recommendations, best practices. They present and discuss patient cases, receive advice from specialists and their peers. And then we also offer CE for licensure as well. On top of that, we have our IndianCountryEcho.org website that has a whole variety of useful clinical and community resources that really have been tailored to Indian country. So I mentioned that it all kind of started with hepatitis C for the University of New Mexico in 2003, for the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board in 2017, with just one ECHO topic of hepatitis C, but we've since expanded to include over 20, focusing on maternal and child health, substance use disorder, HIV, PrEP, trans and gender affirming care, infectious disease, dementia. Here's some more emerging program areas. One that Donica is working with our team on is our violence prevention and adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Super excited about that one. And that should be coming up in the next year. So people take on a number of roles. It's an open environment for anybody to join, whether you're a licensed health professional or clinic staff, or just a community member and you want to join. You're able to join as just a participant, faculty, specialist, a case presenter, a didactic presenter, or a pure contributor. Speeding right along here. Since 2017, Indian Country ECHO has supported several other Indigenous-led organizations in developing their own ECHO programs. Those include hepatitis C, a COVID ECHO, peer specialist ECHO, HIV, infectious disease, and then more recently, a virtual care implementation, which teaches ITU facilities how to implement a telehealth program, which is COVID has really kind of shined a spotlight on the need for that, especially for our rural reservations. Some impact numbers, since 2017, we've conducted over 400 virtual clinics. We've completed 28 in-person and virtual trainings. Over 400 tribes and organizations have been supported. 12,000 plus clinicians have been served, and we've provided over 1,000 specialized treatment recommendations. And that's really with a very small staff. We're ramping up. It started with one person as one FTE working on this, and it's since expanded to 5 regular with the addition of about 5 others part-time working on the program. So just wanted to provide the link on how to join. There's our website. Our main website is indiancountry.echo.org, or you can more specifically go to this one. If there's a program area that interests you, you may also reach out to me and I will drop my contact information into the chat box as well. But I didn't want to take up too much time, just provide a quick overview, and feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions.
Thank you, Nick. That's so helpful. And I think, yeah, if you are willing, it would be great if you could share your slides with me, and then I can also send them out with Donica's slides. Then folks have some of those facts and figures.
Yep,
Because you
that's
did-
not a problem.
I was gonna say, you did a great job of explaining ECHO. That's exactly what I learned when I went to start ECHO. So it was all verbiage I've heard. Thank you so much.
Nick, this is Sue Purchase, and I'm in Duluth. I have, excuse me, a mobile harm reduction program, and providing syringe services. And then also we recently got grants to do case management and HIV testing for people during this. You know, there's an HIV outbreak in Duluth and the surrounding region. My goal is to get I want to build an art studio in Duluth. But my real question for you is, if I had a space, could a harm reduction program be a Project ECHO site?
What do you mean by a site?
Well, I don't know. Just listening to this, and I've had some conversation with Rebecca related to Project ECHO, and just that there's a level of care that people need, whether it's wound care or stuff related to behavioral health and trauma. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could, I don't know, participate somehow and provide services for people like through ECHO. Maybe I'm not understanding or making sense, but it just sparks my interest in what's possible and how we can provide services, and maybe better provide services to people up here as we're testing for HIV and you know, there's certain issues related to drug use, and sometimes providers locally aren't as enthusiastic about treating people that I would serve. And I'm just wondering about what is possible in terms of you know, expanding services to get what people need. If I'm a trusted provider and I have a harm reduction organization and people are there with wound care issues, is it possible to provide some, I don't know, medical advice, something through Project ECHO? It just seems like there should be a fit somehow.
Yes, and if I'm understanding correctly, overall, yes, I do think that is something that is definitely up our alley. I think you're talking of you're providing a space, bringing patients, potential patients, to a certain area, and then trying to connect with ECHO, which is definitely something that we can do.
Yes.
Wound care is a little more complicated, so I'm a little hesitant on that, just because it does require most of the time in person, I guess, examination. But the other topics that you mentioned, harm reduction, HIV testing, things like that, are definitely in the ECHO wheelhouse, and something that we could easily establish.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentations today. Project ECHO, it's just like, it's an awesome opportunity to learn and grow and share. So I appreciate all of you.
Thank you so much.
And I bet you that there's an ECHO out there that could help people in your situation, Sue, you know, working at the ground level that might speak to how to best kind of triage wound care and that kind of thing and get the right referrals, because you are the trusted provider for your demographic. So yeah, we'll talk more, but hook into the Indian country echoes, because there may be a number of them there. It would make sense for you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You give me hope.
Others with questions or comments? Maybe have people have other experiences signing in or working with the Indian Country Echoes?
I want to say that it's such a relief, like as an Indigenous person, to hear these things happening and see things happening. I remember back in my college days speaking up and giving speeches in my public speaking course and being told that, you know, my speech was rude and it was rude to the majority culture, basically. Now that I'm older and more aware of the way things were, it's that I was not being respectful of the majority culture and therefore deemed rude. And so it's really a relief to hear the way that our Indigenous teachings and practices are making their way into the professional field where they need to be, because so many of our people fall through the cracks because of that. So it really is, it's nice to hear all of this, and I'm glad that I was invited to hear your presentation today. Miigwech.
You're welcome. Thank you, Patricia.
So we have time. If you've got a question or a comment, please use the time when we are all together. We don't have to go for 2 hours as well, right? So we can stop when we want to stop. That's the blessing of this kind of community and being in charge of our own future. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming and for listening and for being a part of this learning community. Like I said, we do have our next Echo sessions scheduled for February 22nd. And we're going to be hearing from a colleague in Canada who, her name is Katarina Kendrick, and she's the Harm Reduction Research Coordinator with an organization called CON, Communities, Alliances, and Networks. And she also did a presentation at the Harm Reduction Summit. And her, one of the reports that she highlighted was called Policy Brief, Indigenous Harm Reduction and Reducing the Harms of Colonialism by Moving Beyond 4 Pillars to 4 Fires. And it was a wonderful presentation. She'll be adapting it for our use, and I highly encourage you to come. Again, Nicole will be your host on that day. I can't tell you how honored I've been to be a part of this community, and I'm going to miss you. And hopefully we'll find time to sign in and continue to learn and grow with you all. Danica, thank you. Nicholas, thank you. And I will get the evaluation surveys out, the slides and handouts to everyone within the next couple of days. And hopefully, I'm a little technology challenged as well, but hopefully the recording as well, a link so that if you want to share with a colleague or listen again, you can do that. Any final words?
Thank you, Rebecca, for all that you have done. I appreciate you. You've made a difference for me in Duluth. I wish you the absolute best.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a wonderful day. Stay warm.